How to change your life by mastering this Stoic rule. Stoic philosophy for self-discipline. The war you were never meant to win. You are tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that lives behind your eyes when you wake up already bracing for the day. The kind that follows you through every conversation, every decision, every moment where the world refuses to cooperate with what you had planned. And here is the truth that no one says out loud. That exhaustion is not caused by how hard your life is. It is caused by something far more specific, far more correctable, and far more within your reach than you have ever been led to believe. You are exhausted because you have been fighting a war that was never yours to win. Think about the last time you felt genuinely at peace, not the temporary relief of a problem being solved or a fear going quiet for a moment. Real peace, the kind where your mind stops running, stops calculating, stops bracing. When was that? For most people, the honest answer is rarely, if ever. And the reason is not that life has been too cruel, too random, or too unfair. The reason is that almost everything you have been taught to do in response to life has been aimed in the wrong direction. You were taught to fight, to push harder when things resist, to worry about what might happen so you can prepare, to control outcomes, manage impressions, secure approval, prevent loss. You were taught that the person who grips tightest is the one who loses least. And so you have been gripping, every day, at things that were never yours to hold. But notice what gripping actually produces: the tension in your jaw at the end of a difficult day, the loop of thoughts that replays a conversation you cannot change, the dread that arrives before a situation that has not yet happened, the resentment that builds when someone does not behave the way you needed them to. None of these are signs that you are failing to control enough. They are signs that you are attempting to control things that were never available to be controlled, and paying for that attempt with the only currency you have: your attention, your energy, and your time. The Stoics saw this trap more than 2,000 years ago, and they did not respond with sympathy. They responded with a diagnosis and a cure. The diagnosis: you are suffering not because of what happens to you, but because of what you believe you must control. The cure: one rule. A single principle so precise and so powerful that its consistent application has the ability to restructure the entire architecture of how you experience your life. This is not the first time someone has told you to let go, but this is different from the vague instruction to simply stop worrying or to think more positively. This is a structural intervention, a precise reorientation of where you place your effort, your attention, and your identity. The Stoic framework does not ask you to feel differently. It asks you to think more accurately, and accurate thinking, practiced consistently, produces a life that feels fundamentally different from the inside. What separates those who read philosophy and those who are transformed by it is not intelligence. It is not circumstance. It is the willingness to take a single principle and apply it relentlessly, in small moments and large ones, in private and in public, on easy days and on days when everything is breaking. The people who have genuinely changed through Stoic practice did not do so because they had a revelation. They did so because they chose, again and again, to act in accordance with a clearer understanding of what was actually theirs to govern. Consider also what this war has cost you beyond exhaustion: the relationship strained by your need to manage outcomes that involved other people, the opportunities missed because anxiety about failure crowded out the energy needed for action, the present moments consumed by futures that never arrived. The war against the uncontrollable is not only tiring, it is extraordinarily expensive. And the bill has been paid in the currency of a life that could have been lived more fully, more freely, and with far greater depth than the constant grip allowed. This video is built around that rule, not as a lecture, not as a list of tips, as a dismantling, a careful, chapter-by-chapter removal of the beliefs, habits, and misunderstandings that have kept you locked in that war. What you will find on the other side is not a perfect life. It is something rarer and more durable, a self that no longer requires perfection in order to stand firm. 13 chapters, each one a step deeper into the only territory that has ever been genuinely yours. Begin. The one rule that changes everything. There is a line. Most people never see it. They spend their entire lives on the wrong side of it, exhausted and confused, wondering why the world keeps refusing to obey. The Stoics called this line the Dichotomy of Control. And once you see it clearly, truly clearly, not just intellectually, nothing will look the same again. The rule is this: some things are within our power, and some things are not. That is it. That is the whole foundation. Simple enough to write on a single line, and yet deep enough to reorganize an entire life. What is within your power? Your judgments, your intentions, your effort, your values, the way you interpret what happens to you, the way you choose to respond when the world does not cooperate. These things, and only these things, belong to you. They are yours completely. They cannot be taken, manipulated, or destroyed by anything outside yourself. What is not within your power? Everything else, the outcome of your efforts, how other people behave, what they think of you, the economy, your health in its deepest uncertainties, the timing of events, the loyalty of others, the weather of circumstance. These things influence your life, yes, but they do not belong to you. They never did, and every unit of energy you spend trying to control them is energy spent fighting gravity. Epictetus opened his Enchiridion, his handbook for living, with exactly this principle. Not halfway through. Not as a footnote. On the very first page, in the very first paragraph, he knew that everything else, every other Stoic practice, every other insight into virtue and resilience and wisdom, depends entirely on whether a person has first drawn this line correctly. The line is not drawn once and held forever. It requires daily redrawing, because the mind is constantly pushing against it. Every morning brings new situations that test where you place your attention, and the temptation to cross back into uncontrollable territory is always present. A message that does not arrive when expected. A decision made by someone else that affects your plans. A result that does not match your effort. In each of these moments, the line is tested, and each time you return to your side of it, the line becomes more instinctive, more natural, more genuinely yours. Here is what drawing it correctly actually feels like. It does not feel like relief at first. It feels like loss. Because once you accept that outcomes are not yours to control, you have to surrender the fantasy that if you just worry enough, plan enough, or push hard enough, you can guarantee how things turn out. That fantasy is exhausting and false, but it is also deeply comforting. It gives the illusion of safety. Letting it go requires courage. There is also a subtler loss involved. When you stop trying to control what others think of you, you lose the ability to perform your way into their approval. When you stop trying to manage outcomes, you lose the comforting story that the right amount of effort guarantees the right result. These are not small surrenders. They touch something deep in how most people have learned to generate a sense of security. Letting them go is genuinely difficult. But what comes after that initial loss is something that cannot be purchased, performed, or faked. What comes is clarity. The clarity of a person who knows exactly where their responsibility begins and exactly where it ends. Who shows up fully to what they can influence and genuinely releases, what they cannot. That clarity is the beginning of self-discipline that does not break under pressure. It is the foundation of the entire life you are about to build. The Stoics did not discover this principle through abstract reasoning alone. They tested it in the most demanding conditions available to them. And what they found consistently, across centuries and vastly different life circumstances, is that the line is real, that it holds, and that the person who respects it lives with a quality of inner freedom that no external condition can either grant or revoke. It is also worth understanding what happens to your relationship with effort once this line is drawn correctly. Many people fear that releasing attachment to outcomes will make them less driven, less ambitious, less willing to push through difficulty. The opposite is true. When your effort is no longer contaminated by the anxiety of needing a specific outcome, it becomes purer, more consistent, and more sustainable. You stop performing effort for the sake of feeling in control, and you start applying effort because it is the right thing to do, regardless of what it produces. That shift in motivation is the difference between effort that exhausts and effort that builds. The invisible prison. How misplaced control destroys you. No one builds their own cage consciously. It happens gradually, invisibly, through a series of beliefs that feel like common sense. Beliefs like, if I care enough, I can make this work out. If I stay vigilant enough, nothing bad will catch me off guard. If I manage every variable, I can prevent pain. These beliefs do not feel like imprisonment. They feel like responsibility. They feel like strength. But they are the walls. Consider what happens in your body when you are trying to control something you cannot control. The tension in the chest when a conversation is not going the way you intended. The restless loop of thoughts at 2 a.m. about a situation that will unfold however it chooses to unfold, regardless of how many times you replay it. The sharp irritation when someone does not behave the way you need them to. The hollow dread of waiting for a result you have no actual power to determine. All of that is the cage, and you built it yourself not out of weakness but out of a sincere and deeply misguided attempt to keep yourself safe in a world that does not guarantee safety. The insidious aspect of this cage is that it is self-reinforcing. The more you invest in controlling the uncontrollable, the more your nervous system becomes accustomed to operating in a state of vigilance. And a nervous system in chronic vigilance begins to interpret the absence of control not as peace, but as danger. Releasing control starts to feel unsafe, which makes you grip harder, which produces more exhaustion, which narrows your perspective further, which makes the world seem even more threatening. The cage does not just confine, it shrinks. The psychological research on this is unambiguous. Human beings experience the most severe anxiety, not in situations of pure danger, but in situations of perceived uncontrollability. When we believe we should be able to control an outcome and cannot, the mind interprets that gap as a threat. The nervous system activates, the cognitive loops begin, and the more we believe control should be possible, the more unbearable the absence of it becomes. This is precisely why people with high standards and strong drive are often the most imprisoned. Their capability convinces them that sufficient effort should produce guaranteed results. When it does not, and it inevitably does not because reality is more complex than any individual's capacity to manage, the gap between expectation and outcome becomes a source of profound distress. Not because they are weak, but because they have been applying genuine strength in a direction that was never available to receive it. There is a particular cruelty in this dynamic for people who are genuinely competent. Their competence has worked before. It has produced results in the past. So when it fails to produce results now, the most natural conclusion is to try harder, to apply more effort, to tighten the grip further. The very quality that made them capable in controllable domains becomes the mechanism of their suffering in uncontrollable ones. What the cage ultimately steals is not just energy or peace. It steals presence. The person locked in the effort to control uncontrollable outcomes is never fully where they are. They are always partially somewhere else. In a future they are trying to secure. In a conversation they are trying to manage. In a version of reality they are trying to force into existence. The people in front of them receive a fraction of their attention. The work in their hands receives a fraction of their focus. Life itself is experienced at a fraction of its actual depth, because most of the person is occupied elsewhere, fighting a war that does not exist in the present moment. This is what the Stoics identified as the root mechanism of suffering. Not pain itself, but the resistance to what we cannot change, combined with the desperate effort to change it anyway. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, Book 4, Paragraph 3, that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He was not being poetic. He was describing a precise psychological reality. The moment you stop fighting what you cannot move, its power over you diminishes entirely. The invisible prison begins to dissolve the moment you stop reinforcing its walls. Not by pretending the bars were never there. Not by denying that circumstances are real and sometimes brutal. But by redirecting your energy. every drop of it, away from what you cannot govern and toward the one domain that has always been fully open: what you think, what you choose, and how you act. That redirection is not passive. It is not resignation. It is the most active, most demanding, and most liberating thing a human being can do. It requires more discipline, not less, to focus your full effort on what is genuinely yours, and to consistently refuse the seductive pull of everything that is not. What Marcus Aurelius knew that you were never taught. He ruled the largest empire on earth. He commanded armies, managed a crumbling economy, navigated the deaths of multiple children, survived years of military campaigns on the frozen borders of civilization, and presided over one of the most devastating plagues in Roman history, and through all of it, through the full weight of a world that demanded everything and offered no guarantees, he wrote privately to himself, not for publication, not for legacy, but for daily survival. Those private notes became the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, and they are not the writings of a man who had everything under control. They are the writings of a man who understood at the deepest level that he controlled almost nothing, and who found in that understanding not paralysis, but profound and functional peace. What Marcus Aurelius knew that you were never taught is this: power and control are not the same thing. He had more power than any human being of his era, and he used that power with extraordinary discipline. But he never confused power with control. He never believed that his position entitled him to determine how events unfolded, how people behaved, or how the future would treat his efforts. He accepted, completely, that all of those things existed outside his jurisdiction. In Meditations, Book 2, Paragraph 1, he wrote that at the start of each day he would expect to encounter people who are meddlesome, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, and unsocial. He prepared himself for the full reality of human nature, not by becoming cynical, but by removing the expectation that people should be otherwise. He refused to be surprised by imperfection, and in refusing to be surprised, he refused to be derailed. What makes this passage extraordinary is not just the content but the context. This was a man writing to himself before facing the demands of running an empire. He was not composing philosophy for an audience. He was actively resetting his own expectations so that when reality arrived with its inevitable imperfections, he would not be caught off guard, would not feel personally betrayed, and would not waste a single breath of energy on outrage that served no constructive purpose. He also wrote in Meditations, Book 5, Paragraph 8, that the mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. This is perhaps the most practically powerful sentence in the entire text. It is not a call to passive endurance. It is a declaration that the person who governs their inner response effectively can transform any obstacle into an advantage, not by denying the obstacle, but by changing their relationship to it. This is the practical application of the dichotomy of control at its most demanding level. Marcus Aurelius was not a philosopher who retreated to a study to contemplate virtue and safety. He was a man immersed daily in betrayal, incompetence, grief, and the raw chaos of historical forces beyond any single person's command. His practice was not theoretical. It was survival technology, tested in the harshest conditions possible. What he demonstrated through decades of documented self-reflection is that the rule does not require ideal circumstances to function. It requires only a single consistent act, the daily deliberate choice to return attention to what is yours and release everything that is not. Not once, not in a moment of inspiration. Every single day, including the days when everything is breaking at once. And what the Meditations reveal, read carefully and honestly, is that Marcus Aurelius struggled. He was not a man who had transcended difficulty. He was a man who returned to his principles every single day precisely because the difficulty never stopped. That is the real lesson his life teaches. Not that Stoicism makes life easy, but that it makes the person stronger than whatever life delivers. In Meditations, Book 9, Paragraph 6, he reminded himself that the things that touch the soul are powerless over the soul, that it is only through the soul's own judgment that external events gain the power to disturb. He was not stating a comfortable abstraction. He was issuing himself a direct instruction. The disturbance, if it comes, will come from inside, and it is inside that the work must be done. This radical internalization of responsibility is what separated him from every other powerful figure of his era who was destroyed by the weight of their position. That choice is available to you right now, with the same life you already have. The emperor's throne is not required. The practice is the discipline of desire, wanting what you can actually have. Most suffering begins with wanting, not the act of wanting itself. Desire is not the enemy. It is what we aim desire at that determines whether it builds us or consumes us. And for most people, desire is aimed almost entirely at outcomes they cannot guarantee, people they cannot change, and futures they cannot secure. The result is not motivation. The result is chronic disappointment, punctuated by brief moments of relief whenever the world happens to cooperate. Epictetus understood this at a level that only someone who had lost everything could understand. Born into slavery, denied freedom, denied ownership, denied the basic dignities most people take for granted, he arrived at a question that most free people never think to ask. If all external things can be taken, what can never be taken? His answer restructured his entire existence. And it can restructure yours. What can never be taken is the direction of your desire, the will behind your wanting, the values that determine what you reach toward. These are yours absolutely. And the discipline of desire, what Epictetus called the first and most fundamental discipline of Stoic practice, is the practice of consciously redirecting that will away from external results and toward internal excellence. Consider how differently two people can approach the same goal. One person desires the outcome, the promotion, the recognition, the success, and directs all their energy toward securing it. Their mood fluctuates with every signal that the outcome may or may not arrive. Their self-worth is hostage to a decision they do not control. Their effort is contaminated by anxiety. The other person desires the quality of their own effort, the thoroughness of their preparation, the integrity of their conduct, the standard they set for how they work regardless of what the work produces. Their engagement with the task is clean, their mood is stable, and paradoxically their performance is usually superior because they are operating from a foundation that cannot be shaken by uncertainty. This does not mean you stop caring about outcomes. It means you stop making your peace dependent on them. You work toward a goal with everything you have, you prepare thoroughly, act decisively, and show up with full commitment, and then you release the result to forces that were never yours to govern. This is not half effort. This is full effort paired with full freedom. The freedom that comes from knowing your worth is not determined by whether things went the way you planned. In the Discourses of Epictetus, Book 1, Chapter 1, he draws the distinction sharply. It is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about events. Change the judgment, and the disturbance loses its root. The judgment is yours, always, under every circumstance, without exception. The discipline of desire is the practice of choosing, every day, to want the things that are genuinely within your reach. Not smaller things. Do not misread this as an invitation to shrink your life, but deeper things. The quality of your attention, the integrity of your effort, the courage to face what is difficult without flinching, the consistency to show up when showing up is hard, the honesty to examine yourself without mercy and without shame. These are the things worth wanting. These are the things that when you achieve them, no one can take back. Epictetus taught his students to practice what he called the reserve clause, to pursue every goal with full energy, while internally holding the qualification that the outcome serves a larger purpose beyond personal preference. Not I will achieve this, but I will pursue this with everything I have, and if it does not come, I will meet that reality with the same integrity I brought to the pursuit. This reserve clause is not pessimism. It is the precise mechanism that separates effort from desperation. There is a particular freedom that arrives when you genuinely internalize this practice. It is the freedom of someone who is no longer auditing every interaction, every effort, and every result for evidence of their worth. They already know what they are worth, and that worth is not calculated from outcomes. It is demonstrated through the consistency of how they engage with life, through the care they bring to their work, the honesty they maintain in their relationships, and the courage they show when showing up is difficult. That self-knowledge is not arrogance. It is the quiet, stable confidence of a person who has learned to want the right things. Aim there, and you will never run out of ground to stand on. When acceptance is not weakness. The word acceptance has been misused almost beyond recognition. In popular culture, it has come to mean settling, lowering your standards, tolerating what should not be tolerated, making peace with mediocrity because fighting is too hard. This is not what the Stoics meant. This is not what Marcus Aurelius practiced during 2 decades of war. This is not what Epictetus lived inside a slave's chains. Stoic acceptance is not a surrender of ambition. It is a surrender of the illusion that reality owes you cooperation. It is the radical act of looking at what is, clearly, directly, without distortion, and choosing to act from that clarity rather than from the distorted lens of what you wish were true instead. The Stoics had a phrase for the complete expression of this principle: amor fati, love of fate. Not tolerance of fate, not resignation to fate. Love. The active, embracing, full-hearted acceptance of everything that happens as the exact material from which your life and your character are being forged. Friedrich Nietzsche, centuries after the Stoics, would describe the same principle in almost identical terms, proof that the insight is not culturally bound or historically dated. It is a description of how human beings actually work, when they work at their best. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 10, paragraph 6, that a blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it. This is the image he chose for the ideal human response to adversity. Not resistance, not complaint, not collapse, transformation. The Stoic character does not merely survive what is thrown at it, it metabolizes it, it converts it into clarity, strength, and wisdom. This requires a level of courage that is far more demanding than conventional strength. It is easy to be brave when outcomes are favorable. It requires something far rarer to be fully present, fully committed, and fully at peace when outcomes are painful, unfair, or beyond any reasonable expectation of justice. That is the courage amor fati demands, and it is available to anyone willing to practice it. What makes this practice so difficult is not the concept, but the consistency. It is one thing to embrace difficulty in a moment of philosophical clarity. It is another to do so in the middle of genuine loss, when the relationship ends without warning, when the work you gave years to collapses, when the body fails, when the people you trusted act in ways you never expected. In those moments, the invitation of amor fati is not abstract. It is the most demanding invitation you will ever receive, and accepting it is the difference between a life that is merely endured and one that is genuinely lived. There is also something worth noting about what acceptance makes possible that resistance never can. When you stop fighting reality, you see it more clearly. And when you see it more clearly, you respond to it more effectively. The person in resistance is always slightly blinded by their own refusal to see things as they are. The person in acceptance has their eyes fully open, which means their actions are better aimed, their decisions more grounded, and their resilience more genuine. Acceptance, practiced at depth, also changes how loss feels over time. It does not eliminate grief. Grief is appropriate and human, but it prevents grief from calcifying into resentment or bitterness, the two emotional states that most reliably destroy a person's capacity to move forward. The Stoics were not asking you to feel nothing. They were asking you to feel everything without being permanently altered by it. Seneca addressed this directly when he wrote that he would not remove a wise man's sense of things, but he would make that sense of things serve the person rather than govern them. The goal is not emotional anesthesia. It is emotional sovereignty. The capacity to feel fully while remaining the author of your response to what you feel. That sovereignty is the fruit of practiced acceptance, and it produces a quality of inner life that neither suppression nor unbridled reaction can achieve. The person who confuses acceptance with passivity is still waiting for the world to change before they begin living fully. The person who has understood amor fati is already living fully, not because their circumstances are good, but because they have decided that their circumstances, whatever they are the precise conditions in which their best self will be revealed. That is not weakness dressed up in philosophy. That is one of the most powerful decisions a human being can make. Seneca's warning, the mind that lives everywhere but now. Seneca wrote his letters from a position of relative comfort and extraordinary self-awareness. He was wealthy, influential, and deeply troubled by both facts. He observed, with the clinical precision of someone watching a disease progress, how the human mind devours its own life by refusing to inhabit it. He wrote in Letters to Lucilius, Letter 1, "Reclaim yourself. Gather and save the time that until now has been taken from you, stolen from you, or has simply leaked away." That letter was written nearly 2,000 years ago. It describes with devastating accuracy the condition of the modern mind. We live everywhere except the present. The mind drifts habitually to the future, to the meeting that has not happened yet, the conversation that might go wrong, the threat that may or may not materialize, the outcome that is still unknowable. It invests enormous energy in simulating futures it cannot control, rehearsing disasters that may never arrive, and pre-suffering pain that may never come. And in doing so, it is absent from the only moment that is real, this one. Seneca also observed the other direction of this escape, the past. Many people who are not living in anticipated futures are living in replayed histories, in conversations that ended badly, in decisions they would undo if they could, in versions of themselves they are no longer willing to be. Both directions, past and future, share the same essential feature. Neither of them is here. Neither of them is available to be acted upon. And a mind that habitually occupies either one is a mind that has surrendered its most precious resource, present attention, to territory that yields nothing in return. Seneca called this one of the greatest sources of human misery. Not loss itself, but the anticipation of loss. Not failure itself, but the perpetual fear of it. He observed that most people do not suffer from their actual lives. They suffer from the imagined life running in parallel, the one where everything goes wrong, which they inhabit more fully than the real one. In Letters to Lucilius, Letter 77, he wrote that it is not that I am brave, but that I know what is worth fearing. This is the Stoic precision that cuts through the noise of anxiety. Not all discomfort deserves your attention, and not all futures deserve your dread. The discipline is in learning to distinguish between what is worth engaging and what is merely the mind's habit of constructing threats out of uncertainty. Seneca also makes a point that feels almost surgical in its precision. He notes that we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The suffering of anticipation is frequently more intense and more prolonged than the suffering of the actual event, when and if it arrives. The mind, left unsupervised, specializes in generating worst-case scenarios with vivid emotional detail. Learning to observe this tendency without being governed by it is one of the most practically transformative skills a person can develop. There is another dimension to Seneca's warning that deserves attention. He wrote in Letters to Lucilius, Letter 5, that we should live neither for the future nor for the past, but make the present our aim. What he meant was not that the future is irrelevant. Seneca planned carefully and thought long-term. What he meant was that the present is the only place where life actually happens, where choices are actually made, and where the person we are becoming is actually being shaped. The future is built in the present. Ironically, the person most likely to create a good future is not the one obsessing over it, but the one acting well right now. The Stoic remedy is not to suppress awareness of the future. Planning is rational. Preparation is virtuous. The remedy is to distinguish between preparation, which is purposeful, time-limited, and action-oriented, and anxiety, which is circular, endless, and produces nothing but more anxiety. Here is the test Seneca offers. Ask yourself, is there anything I can do about this right now? If yes, do it, and do it with full attention. If no, then your mind's occupation with this matter is not problem-solving. It is suffering for its own sake, and you are free, at any moment, to withdraw your attention from it and return to what is actually in front of you. The present moment is not a consolation prize for people who have given up on the future. It is the only place where action is possible, the only place where change can begin, the only place where you exist. Return to it, not once, constantly, with the understanding that every moment you reclaim from unnecessary worry is a moment of actual life restored to you. The identity shift from victim to author. There is a story you tell about your life. You may not have chosen it consciously, but it is running constantly. In the background of every frustration, every disappointment, every moment when things do not go the way you needed them to go. And the central character in that story either has power or does not. Either acts or is acted upon. Either authors their experience or is authored by it. Most people, without realizing it, have cast themselves as the second type of character. The one things happen to. The one whose life is shaped by forces outside their control, by other people's choices, by bad timing, by circumstances that were unfair. And this framing is not always wrong. Circumstances are real. Injustice is real. Other people's choices genuinely affect our lives. None of that is in dispute. What is in dispute is what you do with that reality, what it means for who you are and who you are capable of becoming. The narrative of victimhood is seductive for reasons that are worth understanding clearly. It removes the burden of agency. If your life is the way it is because of what others have done or failed to do, then the responsibility for changing it belongs to them, not to you. That is a form of relief, however hollow. It also provides a ready explanation for stagnation. I cannot move forward because of this thing that was done to me, this circumstance that was imposed on me, this opportunity that was denied me. The narrative is self-maintaining, and it is the most effective prison a person can inhabit because it is built entirely from the inside. The Stoic insight here is not about denying hardship. It is about refusing to allow hardship to define your identity. Marcus Aurelius did not deny that he was betrayed, that the empire was crumbling in places, that the plague was killing people he cared about. He acknowledged all of it. What he refused to do was allow any of it to determine how he showed up in response. He chose, actively and repeatedly, to be the author of his response rather than the passive recipient of his circumstances. This shift, from victim to author, is not a permanent achievement. It is a daily, sometimes hourly practice. The mind slides back toward victimhood because victimhood is comfortable. It removes responsibility. It provides a narrative where someone else is always to blame and therefore someone else must fix it. Releasing that narrative requires you to accept something uncomfortable, that your response to what happens is always, without exception, yours to determine. Not your fault, your responsibility. There is a critical difference. Fault looks backward and assigns blame. Responsibility looks forward and asks, given what has happened, what is the best I can now do? Fault is a verdict. Responsibility is a power. And the moment you claim that power, fully, without reservation, you stop being the person life happens to and become the person who decides what life means. Epictetus made this point with characteristic precision in the Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, Chapter 1. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. The opinion is yours to form. Always. That is the authorship the Stoics insist upon. Not authorship of events, but authorship of meaning. And meaning, it turns out, is everything. The transition from victim to author does not happen in a single moment of inspiration. It happens in the accumulated weight of small decisions, each one a tiny insistence on agency in a situation that invited passivity. Over time, those decisions compound into an identity. The person who consistently chooses response over reaction, responsibility over blame, and authorship over passivity gradually becomes someone who could not return to the victim narrative even if they tried. Not because the world stopped being difficult, but because they stopped needing it to be easy. It is also worth recognizing what authorship demands of you in the most difficult moments. When the loss is genuine, the injustice is real, and the pain is not abstract. In those moments, Claiming authorship does not mean pretending the wound is smaller than it is. It means refusing to allow the wound to become your identity. It means saying, "This happened, it was real, it hurt, and it does not define the limit of what I am capable of." That refusal, made quietly, repeatedly, without fanfare, is the most genuine form of courage the Stoics describe. That is not a metaphor. That is the most practical transformation available to a human being. The Stoic practice of daily recalibration. Philosophy without practice is decoration. The Stoics were not interested in decoration, they were interested in results, in what actually changed when a person applied these principles consistently over time. And what they discovered, both in their writing and in their lives, is that the dichotomy of control is not a single insight that transforms a person once. It is a practice that must be returned to, daily, with the same discipline one would apply to any genuine craft. The architecture of that daily practice is not complicated, but it is non-negotiable, and it begins before the first distraction of the day has a chance to pull your attention away from what matters. The morning practice is one of intention. Before the noise begins, before the phone, before the obligations, before the demands of others, you return to the line. What, today, is within my power? What is not? You do not do this theoretically. You do it specifically in relation to what you actually face in the hours ahead, the conversation you are anxious about, the outcome you are hoping for, the situation you wish were different. You identify each one, place it on the correct side of the line, and commit, in advance, to releasing everything on the side that does not belong to you. Marcus Aurelius practiced this so consistently that the Meditations read, in large sections, as a series of daily resets, reminders written to himself each morning about how to interpret the day ahead with clarity rather than anxiety. He was not reminding himself of things he had forgotten. He was reinforcing the orientation of his attention, the same way an athlete warms up before competition, even when they are already in peak condition. The practice is maintenance, not remediation. The midday practice is one of awareness. The morning intention does not hold automatically. The mind slips. Circumstances trigger old patterns. You find yourself gripping at outcomes, reacting to provocations, pouring attention into territory that is not yours. The midday check is simply the act of noticing when this has happened and returning. No self-judgment, no extended analysis, just the return. This moment of return is more important than it appears. Each time you notice the drift and come back, you are strengthening the neural pathway that makes noticing faster and returning easier. The practice is not about being perfect in the morning and staying there all day. It is about the speed and consistency of the return. Over time, the gap between the drift and the return narrows, and what once required an effortful midday check becomes a near instantaneous self-correction. The evening practice is one of review. Not self-criticism, but honest examination. Where did you hold the line? Where did you cross it? What did the crossing cost you? What did holding it give you? This is the data you need for tomorrow's practice. Epictetus's student Arian recorded in the Discourses of Epictetus, Book 3, Chapter 10, that we must examine each day not to condemn ourselves but to educate ourselves about what requires further attention. The Pythagoreans, who influenced several Stoic thinkers, also practiced an evening review, asking themselves 3 questions before sleep. Where did I go wrong? What did I accomplish? And what duty went unfulfilled? The Stoics absorbed this structure and refined it. The goal is not perfection measured against an ideal. It is honest self-knowledge accumulated day after day, building over time into a clearer and more actionable understanding of where your inner work most needs to be applied. What the daily practice ultimately builds is not just discipline in the abstract. It builds a relationship with yourself, a relationship characterized by honesty, care, and growing trust. Each morning you show up for yourself with intention. Each midday you return to yourself without condemnation. Each evening you examine yourself with the frank curiosity of someone who genuinely wants to improve. Over time, that consistency produces a form of self-respect that is earned rather than assumed, and that earned self-respect becomes the most stable foundation from which any other form of growth can occur. These three practices, performed consistently, do not produce dramatic overnight change. They produce something more valuable, gradual, irreversible recalibration of how you habitually respond to life. That recalibration is the definition of genuine self-discipline. Not the white-knuckled suppression of impulse, but the quiet, practiced reorientation of where your attention naturally goes when life tests you. The courage to face discomfort without running. The modern world has built an extraordinarily sophisticated infrastructure for escape. When discomfort arrives, and it always arrives, you have available to you at any moment an unlimited supply of distraction, entertainment, numbing, and avoidance. You can fill every moment of silence. You can ensure that you never have to sit alone with a difficult feeling for more than a few seconds before relief is available. The technology is seamless. The habit forms quickly, and the cost is enormous. The cost is your capacity to be present with reality, to sit with difficulty long enough to understand it, to face what is genuinely uncomfortable without flinching or fleeing. And without that capacity, genuine self-discipline is impossible, because real discipline requires you to consistently choose difficulty over ease, delayed gratification over immediate relief, and honest awareness over comfortable distraction. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort deliberately, not as punishment, but as training. Seneca wrote in Letters to Lucilius, Letter 18, about deliberately setting aside days in which he would live as simply and austerely as possible, not because luxury was wrong, but because familiarity with hardship removes its power to frighten. When you know you can survive discomfort, discomfort loses its authority over your choices. It becomes ordinary. And what is ordinary cannot paralyze you. Consider the specific ways this shows up in daily life. The difficult conversation you keep postponing because the discomfort of conflict feels worse than the erosion of a relationship. The creative project you avoid beginning because the discomfort of potential failure is more vivid than the satisfaction of actual effort. The self-examination you resist because what you might find there feels too threatening to face. In every one of these cases, the avoidance does not remove the discomfort. It amplifies it quietly over time until the original discomfort has grown into something far more consuming than it ever needed to be. There is a compounding effect to avoidance that mirrors the compounding effect of practice, but in the opposite direction. Each time you flee from discomfort, the threshold at which discomfort triggers avoidance lowers slightly. Things that once required a moment of hesitation begin to feel intolerable. The range of experiences you can engage with without retreating slowly narrows. And a life built around the avoidance of discomfort is, by definition, a shrinking life, one that contracts towards safety until safety itself begins to feel like confinement. This principle scales to every level of life. The person who has never sat with boredom will always need stimulation. The person who has never tolerated physical discomfort will structure their entire life around avoiding it. The person who has never faced their own anxiety without running from it will continue to be governed by it, because the anxiety they have never looked at directly remains always larger than it actually is. Courage is not the absence of discomfort. It is the practiced ability to remain present with discomfort long enough to act well in its presence. Marcus Aurelius spent years on military campaigns in conditions that most people of his station would have found unthinkable. He did not do this despite his philosophy. He did it because of it. The inner citadel is not built in comfort. It is built in the very conditions you most want to avoid. The Stoics also understood that voluntary exposure to discomfort has a clarifying effect on values. When you deliberately strip away comfort and convenience, what remains tells you something important about who you actually are beneath the layers of habit and preference. Seneca found during his periods of voluntary austerity that his contentment did not diminish. It deepened. Because the contentment that remains when the comforts are removed is not contingent. It is real. And real contentment, once discovered, cannot be undone by the ordinary fluctuations of circumstance. What discomfort are you currently running from? Name it. Sit with it. Do not explain it away or reframe it into something manageable before you have actually faced it. Just let it be what it is. That act alone, that simple willingness to remain present with what is difficult, is the beginning of the courage that self-discipline requires. And courage, unlike talent or fortune, is available to every human being in equal measure. It only has to be chosen. The inner citadel. What no one can ever take from you. Every external thing you have can be taken. Your health, your money, your reputation, your relationships, your plans, your sense of how the future will unfold. All of it exists in territory that fortune governs, not you. The Stoics were not pessimists for acknowledging this. They were realists. And their realism led them to a discovery that changed how they experienced every single thing that happened to them. If everything external is ultimately beyond your protection, then the only thing worth fortifying is internal. Marcus Aurelius called it the inner citadel, the place inside a human being that circumstance cannot reach. Not because it is hidden, but because it is made of something that external forces simply do not have the power to touch. Your values, your judgments, your will, your orientation toward virtue. This is not a metaphor for coping. It is a description of a real and locatable aspect of your experience. Think of the last time you acted in full alignment with your own values despite significant pressure to do otherwise. The feeling of that, the solidity, the clarity, the sense of being genuinely yourself. That is the citadel. You have been there. You know what it feels like. The practice of Stoicism is the practice of learning to live there, not just visit. Building the inner citadel does not require extraordinary circumstances. It requires ordinary ones, met with extraordinary consistency. Each time you choose your response rather than react from habit. Each time you hold to a value when it is inconvenient. Each time you release an outcome rather than grip it until it breaks you. Each time you act with integrity when no one is watching. These are the construction materials, mundane, daily, and cumulative. What makes the inner citadel different from ordinary willpower is its source. Willpower is a finite resource. It depletes under pressure, exhausts under sustained attack, and fails at precisely the moments it is most needed. The inner citadel is not a resource. It is an orientation. It does not run out because it is not spent. It is accessed through clarity, not through effort. The more clearly you see what is yours and what is not, the more naturally you operate from this internal ground, not because you are fighting to maintain it, but because you have stopped fighting to maintain what was never actually yours. Epictetus, who had no external citadel, no wealth, no status, no freedom in the conventional sense, lived from this internal one with a completeness that shamed many of the free men around him. He did not tolerate his conditions. He transcended them, not by escaping them, but by becoming someone for whom the conditions were ultimately irrelevant to his capacity to live well. He demonstrated that the citadel is not something constructed from favorable circumstances. It is something revealed when circumstances are stripped away. Marcus Aurelius reinforced this idea throughout the Meditations when he wrote of retreating into himself, not as a withdrawal from life, but as a return to the only ground that was reliably stable. He described this retreat as always available, always accessible, always restorative, not because it was easy to find, but because it was always there. The noise of the external world could not enter unless he opened the gate. The citadel also has a protective function that extends beyond the self. The person who lives from their inner citadel does not require external validation, does not collapse under criticism, and does not need others to behave in particular ways in order to maintain their own equilibrium. This makes them remarkably easy to be around. They are not managing others for the sake of their own stability. They are stable already, and that stability, genuine, unperformed, earned through practice, creates a kind of safety in their presence that most people have rarely experienced and recognize immediately when they encounter it. That is available to you. The citadel is already there. It has always been there. What changes with this practice is not its existence, but your ability to find it, trust it, and return to it, especially on the days when everything outside it is telling you to abandon it. The compound effect of living this rule every day. One day of applying the dichotomy of control produces a small shift, almost imperceptible. You notice a moment where you released something you would previously have gripped. You observe a reaction that did not fully take hold. You feel briefly the ease of operating within your actual jurisdiction. Small, quiet, easy to dismiss. But something has begun, and what has begun, compounded daily over weeks, months, and years, produces a transformation so thorough that the person who looks back at the starting point will struggle to recognize themselves in it. The first compound effect is in the quality of your attention. When you stop hemorrhaging energy into uncontrollable outcomes, that energy does not disappear. It becomes available. For focus, for genuine presence in conversations, for creative problem solving within the domain that is actually yours. People who have practiced this for years describe it as a form of clarity that arrives not through addition, more effort, more willpower, more discipline, but through subtraction. The noise of futile control is removed, and what remains is a mind capable of extraordinary attention when it is needed. The second compound effect is in the quality of your relationships. Much of what damages human relationships, resentment, manipulation, unspoken expectations, disappointment, stems from misplaced control. The attempt to manage how another person behaves, feels, or responds. When you release the need to control others and return fully to your own domain, something unexpected happens. Your relationships become more honest, more resilient, and more genuinely connected. Because connection built on control is not connection. It is management, and management exhausts both parties. The third compound effect is in your experience of failure. This is perhaps the most significant. The person who has not drawn the line between what is theirs and what is not will experience every failure as a verdict, evidence of inadequacy, proof that they are not enough. The person who has drawn that line understands that outcomes are not verdicts. Effort and virtue are what they control. Whether effort and virtue produce the desired result is a separate question, one that fortune answers, not them. That understanding does not make failure painless, but it makes failure survivable, and more than survivable, instructive. There is a fourth compound effect that is rarely discussed, the effect on your relationship with time. A person who is constantly trying to control what cannot be controlled is always behind, always catching up to a version of the present that has already passed, already changed, already moved beyond their management. A person who operates within their jurisdiction moves with time rather than against it. They act in the present because that is where their power actually lives. And over years, the accumulation of present-focused action produces results that anxiety-driven striving simply cannot replicate, because anxiety-driven striving is chronically misaligned with what is actually possible right now. There is also a fifth effect, perhaps the quietest and most profound of all. The effect on your sense of self. When your identity is no longer tied to outcomes you cannot control, you become someone who cannot be fundamentally destabilized by external events, not someone who does not feel them, not someone who is untouched by disappointment or loss, but someone whose core sense of who they are does not rise and fall with circumstances. That stability, earned through practice, not inherited through temperament, is what the ancient Stoics called eudaimonia, not happiness in the modern sense. Flourishing, the deep, durable sense of a life being lived in full alignment with one's best self. There is a sixth dimension to this compound effect that touches every area of life simultaneously. The effect on your decision-making. Decisions made from anxiety, from the need to control what cannot be controlled, are chronically distorted. They overweight immediate relief. They underweight long-term alignment. They are made in service of reducing discomfort rather than in service of genuine values. As the dichotomy of control takes root and the anxiety of misplaced control diminishes, decision-making becomes cleaner. Choices align more naturally with actual values. And a life of value-aligned choices, compounded across years, produces an existence that feels coherent, purposeful, and genuinely yours in a way that anxious striving never could. One rule, applied daily, compounding across a lifetime. This is not philosophy as comfort, this is philosophy as engineering. The results are not visible immediately. They are visible eventually, completely and permanently. The only question that matters. Everything that has been built in this video, every insight, every principle, every framework drawn from Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, reduces finally to a single moment. Not a concept. A moment. This moment. The one in which you are reading these words, with your specific life, your specific struggles, your specific reasons for arriving here. All of it comes down to one question. What are you going to do with what you now know? Not tomorrow. Not when the circumstances improve. Not after the difficult situation resolves, the anxiety settles, the uncertainty clears. Right now. Because the Stoic tradition is unanimous on this point, the present moment is the only place where choice exists, and choice is the only thing that has ever been fully yours. You know where the line is. You know that your judgments, your intentions, your responses, and your values are within your power. You know that outcomes, other people's choices, and the trajectory of external events are not. You know that misplacing your energy across that line is the specific mechanism producing the exhaustion, the anxiety, and the sense of helplessness that brought you here. You know all of this now. Knowing is not enough. The Stoics were ruthlessly clear about this. Virtue is not the possession of correct beliefs. Virtue is the consistent expression of those beliefs in action, under real conditions, when it is genuinely difficult. Marcus Aurelius did not write to himself because he had mastered the principles. He wrote to himself because mastery requires constant return. Daily, hourly, in the middle of real problems with real stakes. There will be days when you apply this with precision and the results feel unmistakable. Days when you hold the line through genuine adversity and emerge from it with a clarity you did not have before. There will also be days when you slip, when the old patterns reassert themselves, when the frustration of an uncontrollable outcome pulls you back across the line before you even noticed you had moved. Those days are not failures. They are the practice. Every return is the practice, and the practice is the point. The philosopher who reads without acting remains only a philosopher. The person who reads and then acts, even imperfectly, even partially, even with regular lapses and necessary returns. That person is doing something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. They are actually living the philosophy. In the dirt of real circumstances, with real resistance, with real consequences, Seneca wrote in Letters to Lucilius, letter 34, that he recognized in his student the qualities he had hoped to develop, and in that recognition, felt that his own progress was confirmed. Progress in Stoic practice is not private in the way achievement is private. It radiates, it changes how you show up in every relationship, every conversation, every moment of pressure. The people around you feel it before they can name it. And that influence, quiet, earned, and genuine, is itself a form of the compound effect this philosophy produces. There is one final thing worth naming before this ends. The Stoics were not indifferent to the lives of others. They were deeply, practically committed to the idea that the person who governs themselves well becomes someone of greater use to the world. Marcus Aurelius did not practice Stoicism in isolation from his responsibilities. He practiced it in service of them. Epictetus did not teach philosophy to help people retreat from life. He taught it to help people engage with life more fully, more honestly, and with greater capacity to absorb difficulty without being broken by it. The inner work is not separate from the outer life. It is the foundation of it. This is the call, not to be perfect, not to never slip back into old patterns, but to begin, and then to return each time you drift, and then to begin again. This is the structure of a Stoic life, and it is not glamorous. It is the unglamorous, daily, entirely private practice of governing the one thing you have always had the power to govern. Peace is not waiting for you somewhere ahead, beyond a better version of your circumstances. It is not the reward at the end of a resolved problem or a healed wound. It is available now, not as a feeling, but as a choice. The choice to operate within your jurisdiction with full commitment and to release everything outside it without resentment. Marcus Aurelius had an empire pulling at him from every direction. Epictetus had chains. Seneca had power and all the corruption it invites. And all three of them found through the same rule the same freedom. Not freedom from difficulty, freedom within it. You have one life. The conditions you are waiting for are not coming. The version of yourself you are capable of becoming does not require better circumstances. It requires a decision, made now, to stop fighting the war you were never meant to win, and to begin the only battle that has ever truly been yours. That decision is available to you right now. Make it.